All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unravel one of the most fascinating questions in Indian personal law. Right at the very beginning of our source notes, personal law is beautifully described as the law a person carries with him. It governs those deeply personal aspects of life, things like marriage, succession, and guardianship. But here is the critical puzzle we have to solve first. To know exactly who these laws apply to, we must first definitively answer how the law defines belonging to a religion. Specifically, for our purposes today, who is legally a Hindu? It seems like a super simple question, right? But as we'll see from our source material, this identity isn't strictly defined anywhere in the ancient texts. Hindu law literally has the oldest pedigree of any known system of jurisprudence. It's originally based on ancient foundational scriptures like the Shrutis and Smritis, and yet, nowhere in those ancient texts is the term actually explained. That alone makes the legal journey to define it, moving from uncodified ancient traditions to modern judicial interpretation, just incredibly captivating. To truly understand how this evolved, we're going to take a funnel approach today. We'll start broad with the origins of Hindu law, look at the modern legislative definition, tackle the tricky rules for mixed parentage, examine the law of conversion, and finally zoom in on the exceptions and exclusions. Okay, Section 1, the origins of Hindu law. Let's start right at the top of that funnel with the geographical roots of the term itself. The historical shift we see here is massive. Historically, the term Hindu was entirely territorial. It simply represented the nationality for people who inhabited the Indus Valley. Our sources note that Persians referred to the Indus River as Sindhu, and the people of the region as Hindus. The Greeks called the people living in and beyond the Indus Valley Indoi, which, as you can guess, later became India. But fast forward to today, and that territorial significance is completely lost. As noted by the Supreme Court in the landmark 1966 Sastri Yagna Purshedji versus Moldus Vaishya case, the term today does not denote any specific nationality or territory at all. It is now heavily based on religion and domicile. So, if it's no longer territorial, what exactly is the religious definition? Well, before formal legal codification happened, philosophers attempted to define the core tenets. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, in his work Gita Rahasya, gave us this really broad philosophical framework. He defined a Hindu through the acceptance of the Vedas with reverence, the recognition that the ways to salvation are diverse, and the realization that the number of gods to be worshipped is very large. It's an incredibly fluid and non-static definition, which makes pinning it down legally quite a challenge. Which brings us to Section 2, the modern legislative definition. Let's see how this broad philosophical idea was actually built into formal modern legislation. The crucial takeaway here is that when the legislature finally sat down to codify personal laws in the 1950s, through statutes like the Hindu Marriage Act and the Hindu Succession Act, they had to cast a very, very wide net to capture that diverse philosophical reality we just talked about. Under Section 2 of the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, the law applies to any person who is a Hindu by religion in any of its forms or developments. This explicitly includes groups like the Veerashaiva, the Lingayat, and followers of the Brahmo, Parthana, or Arya Samaj movements. Now, what's really fascinating here is that the law defines a Hindu not just by what it is, but largely by what it is not. The legislation explicitly brings Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs under the umbrella of Hindu personal law. Furthermore, it acts as this giant catch-all for anyone domiciled in India who isn't explicitly excluded. And who is explicitly excluded? Muslims, Christians, Parsis, and Jews. They are governed by their own distinct personal laws. So legally speaking, if you are an Indian domiciled and you don't fall into those 4 explicitly excluded categories, Hindu law generally applies to you, unless custom proves otherwise. This brings us to a profound observation by the Supreme Court in the 2005 case of Gopalakrishna Nair versus State of Kerala. The court stated that Hindu is a comprehensive expression. It gives the widest freedom to people of all religious hues, opinions, philosophies, and beliefs to come within its fold. I think that perfectly captures the non-static, totally pluralistic nature of the legal definition. We aren't talking about a rigid codified religious dogma here, it's a massive legal umbrella. Moving on to Section 3, rules for mixed parentage. What happens when things aren't so clear-cut, like in families with mixed religious backgrounds? The legislature actually anticipated this gray area beautifully. According to the explanation to Section 2.1, if both parents are Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, or Sikh, the child is naturally governed by Hindu law, whether they are legitimate or illegitimate. But if only one parent belongs to these faiths, the determining factor completely shifts from pure birth to upbringing.
The law explicitly states the child falls under Hindu law if they are brought up as a member of the tribe, community, group, or family to which the Hindu parent belongs.
Let's look at a wild, real-world application of this in the case of Rajkumar versus Barbara. Here, we see a child born to a Hindu father and a Christian mother. Crucially, there was absolutely no proof of the child being brought up as per any specific religion. Yet the court held the child was a Hindu. The notes highlight something incredible here. Even an atheist, or a person who believes in the commonwealth of all religions, is legally held to be a Hindu based on their birth, no matter what they do with their personal religious practices. It really underscores just how wide that legal umbrella stretches. All right, Section 4, the law of conversion. Moving further down our funnel, we reach another major stress test for the law. How does one legally become a Hindu if they weren't born one? This actually presented a really unique challenge for the modern judiciary. The original ancient texts, the Dharma Shastras, prescribed absolutely no specific methods or rituals for conversion. Why? Because historically, the religion is inherently non-proselytizing in nature. It wasn't actively seeking to convert outsiders, so it literally didn't write rules for it. Therefore, the modern courts had to step in and create the legal framework themselves to handle modern realities. And they did exactly that in the landmark 1971 case of Perumal versus Poonaswamy. The court laid out 3 crucial, actionable steps for valid conversion to Hinduism. First, there must be a bona fide or genuine intention to convert. Second, this intention must be backed up by real-world conduct. And third, and perhaps most importantly, there must be acceptance by the community as a Hindu. It's not just a personal declaration you make in your living room. It requires a societal embrace. Building on that precedent, the 1975 case of Mohandas versus Devasan Board simplified things just a bit. The court clarified that if a person makes a bona fide declaration and actively follows Hinduism for some time, they legally become a Hindu. A sincere declaration, coupled with actual practice over time, is enough to cross that threshold into the broad legal fold we talked about earlier. Finally, Section 5, Exceptions and Exclusions. Let's explore the absolute tip of our funnel. We've seen how wide the net is, but when are you definitively not a Hindu under the law? Well, there are a few very clear boundaries. First off, you cease to be governed by this personal law if you formally convert out of it, say to Islam or Christianity. Second, under Section 2.2 of the Act, if you belong to a scheduled tribe as listed in Article 366(25) of the Constitution, the Hindu Marriage Act does not apply to you by default. These tribes are protected and governed by their own unique customs. And third, going back to that mixed parentage rule, an illegitimate child of a Hindu father who was brought up entirely in their mother's non-Hindu faith is excluded. This specific boundary is perfectly illustrated by the 1904 Lingappa versus Isudasan case regarding the upbringing exception. Here, an illegitimate child of a Hindu father was brought up entirely under the mother's Christian faith. Unlike that Rajkumar case earlier, where there was no religious upbringing proven, here the Christian upbringing was established as a fact. Because of that specific upbringing, the court held the child was legally not a Hindu. And that brilliantly brings our explainer full circle today. We've seen how a legal identity transitioned from a simple geographical term for people living near the Indus River into an incredibly broad, non-static, legislative umbrella covering diverse philosophies and mixed parentage, all shaped by fascinating case laws over the last century. As we wrap this up, I'll leave you with this provocative thought. If a definition rooted in ancient rivers can evolve into a complex legal framework of intentions, community acceptance, and upbringing, how on earth will it continue to adapt to the increasingly interconnected and globalized families of the future? Thanks for learning with me today.